right, well, welcome back to a new season of Grows. I hope that you are getting connected and getting reacquainted with each other as we begin this new semester. This season, we're going to be continuing our series that we've been doing on Sunday mornings about God's will for me and kind of really just taking it to the Grows so we can dig a little bit deeper into what this means and look at some more examples. On Sunday mornings, again, we're kind of focusing on passages that literally say this is God's will for you. But on Grows here for this season, we're going to look at some of those maybe lesser times where it's not quite as clear, and so we're going to have some time to discuss all that. And as we kick off to this evening with you guys in your Grows, I just kind of want to focus in on a word that I didn't really focus a whole lot of on Sunday mornings that I think can really help us to kind of really understand what we need to do as followers of Jesus when it comes to figuring out what God's will is for us. And if you've been around, you know Romans 12:2 is kind of our theme verse for this whole series, that God has a good, pleasing, and perfect will for us. But if you remember, it starts off by saying, do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. It says, then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. And so there's the idea that we have to do something so that we can, like it says, test and approve what God's will is, because God's will may not be very clear or may not be just kind of like super easy to discover. We have to kind of dig in a little bit. And so I really like this word. I know you guys think I'm a word freak, but I think it's important for us to understand what these words mean, because it helps us to kind of clarify and understand on a deeper level what is being asked of us. And so it's really interesting is that this whole phrase, then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, okay? The then you will be able to test and approve is actually only two words. If you look up in the Greek text, you're going to discover that that is two words translated into a whole lot of words in English. Then you will be able to test and approve. And it's this Greek word dokimazo, okay? Dokimazo, it's kind of an interesting word. It's used all over the New Testament, 20-something times, 22, I think. And literally, it kind of means test and approve. And so it means like you need to test before you approve. You need to investigate before you verify and before you approve this thing. You really got to do your homework. You got to kind of do some research. You got to dig into it. And so it's not just approve without testing, it's test before approving. And I think that's an important distinction, because in our world today, I think a lot of times we approve before testing as opposed to approving before testing, or testing before approving. Sorry, even I got it confused there. And we need to kind of investigate these things and research these things. And we've talked about this before, but as disciples of Jesus, that literally means people who have put in the mental effort necessary to think something through. We got to engage. We got to think these things through. And so I kind of want you to think of some examples. So I want you to think about this idea of testing before approving. It's interesting, you know, it's like, I don't know if you've been driving around lately. I think it's getting worse and worse out there with the drivers and their skill or their lack thereof. And you kind of wonder sometimes, like, who approved this person to drive? Like, who gave this person a driver's license, right? Who did that? Did they just approve this person, or has this person been tested? Have they been vetted to see if they actually know what they're doing? Has someone looked at their eyes to see if they can actually see where they're driving? Has anybody tested them with the rules to see if they know what to do at a stop sign or a red light? Has anybody taken a driver's test with them and lived and said, this person I approve? It's like you got to test them before you approve them. I kind of think of my oldest son, Bodie. Some of you guys have been asking what he's doing, and he's going to graduate here in May. And he's been studying. At Christmas time, he ordered a whole bunch of books on Amazon, and I noticed my bill got very, very large because he's ordering a bunch of books that are going to help him study for what's called the DAT, the DAT, which is a dental admissions test, because he's looking to be a dentist, and in order to become a dentist, you have to take some classes, and you got to go to school. In order to get into school, you got to take the test because you're tested before you're approved. Anybody want to go to the dentist and, you know, just some Yahoo just shows up and like, yeah, I think I'm going to drill into your face and just kind of think that something doesn't look right. Like, no, you want them to be tested before they're approved so that you know that they're legitimate and they're genuine and that they're going to be okay. This is everywhere in our world. Anybody want to get on a plane and like you get a pilot and it's like, yeah, I just showed up today. This is my first time. Like, no, we want you to be tested before you're approved because that's going to go well for me. When it comes to God's will, think of it that way. When it comes to understanding what God's will is, God's wishes, God's desires, God's best offer, God's preferences for our lives, that again, we can choose to accept or reject. It's like, how do we know? And he's saying you have to test and approve. You got to test before approving. And so this is the idea I just want us to be thinking about when it comes to God's will, that it's not always so clear as maybe some of the ones we're looking at on Sunday mornings. And sometimes you got to test it. Well, always, really, you got to test it before approving it. Don't just approve it and say, well, this is God's will because I just think it's God's will. Like, no. Test it before approve it. And so what we're going to do as we kind of kick off this semester in our Grows is we're going to be looking at several passages, I think 7 out of the 22 in the New Testament, where this word dokimazo appears. And what I want us to do is kind of really dig into them and go, okay, well, what does it mean for us to test and approve as followers of Jesus so that we may be able to know what God's will is? And so we're going to, again, look at several different passages. You're going to kind of dig into them. You may want to read, a couple verses before or after to really understand the context. But the idea is that by the end of this session, if you will, at the end of this discussion, that we really have put in some mental effort to kind of really understand the test and approve of Romans 12, chapter 2. To do not conform to the pattern of the world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, because then you will be able to test and approve, 2 words, you and dokimazo, what God's will is. His good, pleasing, and perfect will. So I hope you guys will chew on that a little bit, and we'll have some more fun next week. But until then, we will see you then.